Magandang araw mga kapwa naka-quarantine. Ako po si Howie Severino, journalist at COVID survivor. Maaring sabihing naundoy ang malaking bahagi ng Luzon mula Bicol hanggang Cagayan. Ano bang natutunan natin sa paulit-ulit na pagbaha? Bakit tila nabigla pa rin ang taong bayan? Ano ba ang pangmatagalang solusyon? Tatalakayin natin ang mga tanong na yan kasama si Dr. Mahar Lagmay, ang scientificong namuno noon sa Project NOAA, at ang urban planner na si Paulo Alcazaren. Kasama natin ngayon ay si Dr. Mahar Lagmay, isa sa mga scientifico na sumusuri sa mga kalamidad ng ating bansa at siya rin ang Executive Director ng UP Resilience Institute at ng NOAA Center. Magandang araw sa inyo, Dr. Lagmay.
Good afternoon. Magandang hapon, Howie.
Doc, siguro napansin nyo rin yung panawagan ni Mayor Tin Antonio, yung mayor ng maliit na bayan ng Alcala sa Cagayan na bahang-baha dahil dito sa huling bagyo. Ang sabi niya, please, let's listen to the scientists. Kasi sabi nga niya, kaya paulit-ulit daw ang baha dahil hindi raw pinakikinggan ang mga scientifico. Bilang isang scientifico, Doc, ano bang si tingin nyo ang sinasabi ng mga scientist na hindi pinakikinggan?
Well, unang-una po, 100% agree ako. Pagka ang usapin ay tungkol sa buhay, disaster risk reduction, importante po ang ating mga aksyon, ang ating mga policies, ang ating mga desisyon. Kasama na rin po ang COVID-19. All of these must be science-based. Itong pangyayari na to sa Northern Luzon, in particular Cagayan, siyempre, ang pangunahing dahilan talaga ay yung Ulysses. Yung Ulysses yung nagdala kasi ng ulan. At bagamat yung track ng bagyo ay a little bit north of Manila, ang kanyang lawak, malaki yung diameter niya at forecasted also to deliver a lot of rain all the way to northern Luzon, dun sa mga kabundukan. At dahil malaki nga ang binuhos nito, nag-ipon nito dun sa mga watershed at nag-flow papuntang Cagayan River. Malaki po yung Cagayan Valley, malaki yung Cagayan River. Ang dami pong mga source ng tubig niyan. At isa dito ay yung Magat Dam. Kumbaga, yung Magat Dam nag-release ng almost 6,250 yata yung nakita kong cubic meters per second. At kapag malaki ang inflow mo doon sa Cagayan River, isang dahilan yon kung bakit nagsiswell yung ilog ng Cagayan River. At pag nagswell ito, aapaw yan, papunta doon sa floodplains, na kung nasaan yung mga syudad, nandun yung mga bayan, nandun yung mga tao. At kapag nabaha ito, syempre, malaking perwisyo at minsan nakakatupok ng maraming buhay. Pero isa yan doon sa mga dahilan lamang. Kung tatandaan natin, nung Ondoy, di ba, sinabi din po ni Dr. Siringan na itong maraming dito sa Pasig River, maraming mga parang nire-reclaim yung gilid ng Pasig River kaya hindi makaagos yung tubig ng mabuti papuntang Manila Bay. So ganun din po yung nangyari dito diyan sa sa pagsusuri. Ang sinasabi, yung Cagayan River ay yung river doon na dapat tuloy-tuloy, merong parang bottleneck doon sa may Alcala.
Makikita mo yung ilog, nire-retrace ko yung ilog. Dito sa punto na ito, makikita mo, biglang, ba't nawala yung kulay pula?
Mm-hmm.
Kita mo, ang konti-konti na lang. Yan yung makipot na bahagi ng channel. Parang ganun yung ilog. Pinisil natin siya doon sa constricted area. Kaya ngayon, doon sa upstream part, ay umapaw siya ng umapaw.
Isa din po yan na dahilan, siyempre, yung lakas ng ulan, tapos may Magat Dam na nag-release ng 6,250 cubic meters per second. Ang laki nun. Sana mas na-distribute na hindi ganun kalaki yung na-release per second. Kung nakagamit ng forecast, mas mababawasan yon at hindi biglang aapaw yung Cagayan River. Ang isa pa, yung pagputol ng mga puno. So, pagka putol yung mga puno, walang forest, syempre, yung runoff will increase, no? So, hindi ma-retain muna doon sa kabundukan yung maraming tubig. At marami pa pong ibang dahilan. So, yun ang mga pinag-aaralan. Ang importante, magamit natin yung siyensya at saka teknolohiya, katulad ng mga computers, to our advantage, no? Para nakikita natin yung mga scenarios ng possible floods, no? So that we can plan our communities.
Itong pag-release ng tubig, ng napakaraming tubig ng Magat Dam ay may announcement naman, no? Bakit tila nabigla pa rin yung maraming tao nung nagbaha, no? Pati yung governor ng Cagayan, sabi niya wala naman daw signal yung Pag-asa sa kanila, wala daw silang naramdaman na bagyo, kaya bigla na lang daw dumating yung baha. So they seem to have been unprepared and even unwarned. So saan ba nagkulang doon sa communication and warning?
Dalawa yung components ng tanong, Howie, no? Yung una, na-warningan naman ng dam, no? Nung dam operators. Totoo yun, nakita ko yung mga warning, November 9 pa lang. Ang nakalagay ay magre-release sila dahil may bagyong Ulysses ng 200 cubic meters per second. And depending on the rainfall, ay magre-release ng kung ano man ang kailangan na i-release para hindi magiba yung dam. Pero po, ang 200 cubic meters per second ay kakaiba po yun doon sa 6,250 cubic meters. Malaking diferensya po. Di ba po nagbaha noong Pepeng yun, doon sa Pangasinan, nung nag-release ang San Roque, no? Bahang-baha ang Pangasinan noon. At ang na-release noon ay siguro mga 5,000 cubic meters per second. Mas malaki ito sa Magat ngayon, 6,250. Noong Ondoy, nagkaroon tayo ng baha, ang flow po dyan ay siguro umaabot ng 4,000 cubic meters per second. No? So makikita na kaagad natin na napakalaki nung ilabas na yon na discharge. The government is forming a committee to investigate the matter. No? So everything is preliminary, pero ang nakita ko parang sumabay yung pag-discharge ng malaki doon sa pagpasok ng tubig. Dapat, dahil meron tayong forecast that was given November 9 also, no? Nagbaha ng, I think, November 12 or 13. So you had a couple of days to release water, to free up space behind the dam, such that pag dumating yung bagong inflow due to the rains of Ulysses, hindi ganun kalaki yung kailangan mong i-discharge, no, na rate. Kumbaga, you spread it out over time because you have a forecast. And if you do that, the floods wouldn't have been that high. So hindi po yung kapag nandyan na, tsaka ka lang a-action. Dapat po anticipatory. No? The science can give you the forecast. And you must trust science.
Balikan ko yung communication, Doc, no? Announcing that you're going to release water is different from saying magkakaroon ng malaking baha. Kasi para sa maraming tao, baka hindi na nako-connect yon, no? Because dams really release water all the time, no? Pero iba rin yung magsasabi na pag nag-release kaming tubig, maaring lampas tao yung magiging baha dyan sa kalye ninyo.
Correct. In fact, dyan nga sa Tugigaraw City, tsaka yung mga officials dyan, nakausap ko siguro mga 3 years ago, no? Ang sinasabi nila, sanay kami sa release ng dam. Magat Dam always releases water, di ba? Sanay kami pag nag-a-announce, sanay kami. So again, as I said, ang 200 cubic meters per second is way low, much lower than 6,250 cubic meters per second, no? So kung ma-forecast mo, kaya mong bawasan yung tubig doon sa dam. Pero it's a risk, di ba? Kasi baka mamaya hindi nga umulan. So that's the reason why we must trust in science, di ba?
Kada may paparating na bagyo, nag-i-issue ang Pag-asa ng warning gamit ang mga signal number mula 1 hanggang 5. Ngunit nakabase ito sa lakas ng hangin na dala ng bagyo, hindi sa rami ng tubig at posibleng pagbaha na maidudulot nito.
Is there a system for alerting people na magkakaroon ng flood?
Howie, meron, no? In fact, that kind of system was used from 2014 to the end of to December 2016, no? It was used by NDRRMC. It is called the hazard specific area focused and time bound warning.
So just 2 years.
Yeah, ginagamit 'yon, and it averted about 15 disasters. Exactly your question, no? Paano ginagawa 'yon? Nawawarningan. Yung signal number natin, 1 2 3 4 5 is based on wind, no? Pag may bagyo. It does not have anything to do with the rainfall, no? The rainfall forecast, no? Kasi akala natin, walang bagyo, wala namang signal dito, tapos babaha, di ba? Maraming beses na po nangyari yan. I remember nung Nona, in 2015, umulan doon sa Aurora, sa Nueva Ecija, kabundukan ng Sierra Madre, no? And then, nasa South China Sea na yung bagyo, tapos, padating pa lang yung baha sa Pampanga at saka Bulacan. Pero it came 2 days after. So, malayo na yung bagyo. So, paano maniniwala yung mga tao? NDRRMC called the governor, si Governor Pineda. Maaalala ni Governor ito. In-explain na palating na yung baha dyan. Ang sabi ni Governor nung umpisa, wala nang signal dito. Ang taas na ng araw. No? Opo, pero padating na. So, a scientist came in, took the phone, and explained to Governor Pineda. No? So, they prepared a day in advance. So, pwede yun. So, going back to that signal number, it's only about wind, di ba? Meron, dahil dyan, napunayan, ginawan ngayon ng ating gobyerno yung rainfall warning, di ba? Meron tayong yellow, may orange, meron red rainfall warning. Pero ang komento ko po doon ay pagka meron tayong ganon, that refers to sa lugar na kung saan siya umuulan. Pero maaari kasi minsan yung ulan ay nandun sa bundok. And it will take time for the water to flow and hit a community downstream, no? Normally yan, mga anywhere from 4 to 6 hours, sometimes 12 hours, depending on the size of the river. So what's important here is that we need to have the forecast, which gives us an idea of the flooding days in advance, and that must be complemented by near real-time data. So kung sa bundok, meron kang mga mata in the form of sensors, rain gauges, alam mo kung ano yung dami ng ulan doon sa bundok. And you can use computers to simulate that, how far or how big the floods will be generated, that can be generated, and how high the floods will be, and where they will get distributed. No? So, ayun, natukoy mo yung hazard, natukoy mo yung mga lugar and barangays, natukoy mo yung time kung kailan siya darating. At bago pa dumating yon, because at the very least, you're given 3 to 6 hours. No? That's enough time to get the people out of their houses so that they won't be trapped on their rooftops. No? Ginamit po yung ganyang system 2014 and 2017. And based on our records, it averted at least 15 potential disasters.
Okay, that begs the question nga, bakit ginamit lang doon sa 3 taon na yon? Ano? Obviously, kulang yung warning system ng Pag-asa. Bakit hanggang 2017 lang? Ano bang nangyari dyan sa flood warning system na sinasabi ninyo?
The information ng yung mga real-time sensors and yung kung kailan babaha, saan yung ulan, gaano kalakas yung ulan, those were provided by the sensors of Project NOAA. No? And we used to be part of NDRRMC. No? Being part of what they called as the PIDRA system, Pre-Disaster Risk Assessment. These are the rain gauges, the water level sensors. During that time, na-transfer na po namin lahat yan sa DOST, no? Yung mga sensors na yan. Sila po ang nag-aalaga niyan. There were about 2,000 sensors that were deployed. Ito yung mga mata natin sa bundok, mata natin sa ilog, mata natin sa mga patag na mga lugar. Nandyan yan, NOAA placed all of those sensors. No? Actually, it was Secretary Monteo's idea to put all of those sensors. No? Ganun po yung nangyari dito sa Habagat, di ba? Yung Habagat, at 2 o'clock in the morning, there was a frenzy. Media woke everybody up, no? Sabi, nandyan na yung bagyo, 5:30 darating yung baha dyan sa SM, sa may Provident, umalis na kayo. So they had 3.5 hours, I think, no? 3.5 hours para ilikas, para hindi na nasa bubong yung mga tao, natatrap sa bubong yung mga tao. That kind of barangay level, no, na near real-time information, which provided hazard-specific area focus and time-bound warnings. I didn't see that during Ulysses. I didn't see that during Vinta. I didn't see that during Ompong. I didn't see that during Rosita. I didn't see that during Urduha and Usman. So I guess I'm right in saying that those hazard-specific area focus and time-bound warnings that I was talking about was not there.
So this did not have to happen. In other words, I mean, we had enough warning. Kasi it's one thing, preventing the flood is a very different matter from saving yourself and your family from the worst effects of the flood. So yung information to enable people to do that, hindi talaga umabot. We're trying to prevent, that's why we're trying to point what went wrong so we can correct the problem.
It's a very simple answer to your question. We should put back that hazard-specific, area-focused, and time-bound warning. The way it was done from 2014 to 2017, because I know for a fact that it saved many lives. It averted about 15 disasters during that period. Now, how do we get that back? However, whatever means and however we do it, we have to get that back. We cannot afford to have the present system that happened during Ulysses to happen again.
Okay.
Because if not, we will be seeing people on rooftops in Cagayan and Marikina. Actually, maraming mga mga storya diyan, no? Every time na merong disaster, ang sasabihin ng victim na survivor, no? Sasabihin niya, first time nangyari ito. Hindi namin in-expect ito. Exactly what you are saying, no? Hindi namin in-expect na ganitong kataas. Lahat ng disaster, ganyan ang sasabihin ng mga survivors. And that tells me, it only tells us that hindi nakapag-anticipate kasi na-surprise yung mga tao, di ba? So kailangan gagamit tayo ng siyensya, gagamit tayo ng teknolohiya, use it to our full advantage so that we can predict, we can anticipate. So hindi lang yan sa pag-call nung babahain ba yan, saang lugar babahain, ito yung sinasabi kong hazard-specific, area focus and time-bound warnings. Ang sinasabi ko din dito, kailangan yung climate change na predictions na mas malaki pa yung baha, mas madami pa yung ulan, yun, kailangan ina-anticipate natin yon, and we have to use science again to be able to incorporate that, to be able to visualize the scenarios that may happen in the future. So once we are able to do that, that's the ideal thing, no? But paano natin gagawin yon? Babalik tayo ngayon doon sa tanong. Pakinggan natin ang siyensya.
Bagamat nakatutulong sa pagbabahagi ng impormasyon, maaring hindi raw epektibo ang mga text advisory na natatanggap ng publiko sa tuwing may bagyo.
So, meron tayong alerts that we receive. Parating na yung bagyo, no? Tapos merong dala itong ulan na ganitong kalakas sa mga probinsya na ganito, ganyan, 10 provinces sometimes listed or more. Mag-ingat sa baha at landslide. Now, if you receive that kind of alert every time there's a storm, we have 20 storms that enter the Philippine area of responsibility. Many of those, not all, make landfall. But pag palaging nakaka-receive yung mga tao ng ganon, it will not flood kasi in all those places. And if you keep on receiving that at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning, people will become desensitized, no? Ang tawag diyan sa disaster science community ay cry wolf effect, no? Parang nauumay yung mga tao, and the next time that it happens, when it really happens, they didn't believe in it anymore. Kasi palagi tayong nakaka-receive niyan. hindi naman nagbaha. Ang ulan kasi, pag may bagyo, hindi naman even yan in all those provinces. It will only dump the rains heavily in some places, and that will cause the floods. No? That emphasizes my call for hazard-specific, area-focused, and time-bound warning.
Let's zoom out now from our focus on Cagayan Valley, and nabanggit mo yung climate change. No, let's talk about the planet, no, and its impact on the Philippines. How about this projection as early as 2050? Malaking bahagi ng Maynila ay maaring nasa ilalim na ng tubig.
Hindi naman lahat ng Metro Manila, but the coastal areas. No? In 100 years from now, many places, coastal areas specifically along Manila Bay, will get flooded during high tide. So it will affect the way people live in those communities. They have to consider that in their plans, and they have to do something. Maybe it's infrastructure, maybe it's monitoring the groundwater pumping, because the groundwater pumping is contributing significantly to ground subsidence. We have to incorporate the climate change scenarios in our plans for all our LGUs, for all cities and municipalities of the country. Kasi if you do not incorporate those future scenarios, your planning will fall short of what the people need to do in anticipation of those bigger events. So, yun ang over 2 decades of studying disasters, trying to find out where we made mistakes, no? Not to blame anybody. We just do the science to find out where we make mistakes so that we don't repeat them.
Right. Good advice. At maraming salamat sa iyong insight at pagbabahagi. Dr. Mahar Lagmay, Executive Director ng UP Resilience Institute at ng NOAA Center.
Maraming salamat, Howie.
Makakausap natin ngayon si Paulo Alcazaren, isang urban planner at landscape architect. At miyembro din siya ng Philippine Institute of Environmental Planners, the Philippine Association of Landscape Architects, as well as the Alliance for Safe and Sustainable Reconstruction, otherwise known as ASSURE. Magandang araw sa iyo, Architect Paulo Alcazaren.
Magandang araw din sa iyo, Howie. Kumusta na?
Oh, okay, ito, magaling na. Thank you. Nakasurvive. So, Paulo, alam mo, sa totoo lang, humahanga ako sa iyo kasi ramdam ko yung frustration mo through many years, no? Pero sa kabila ng frustration na yan, tuloy pa rin ang mga panawagan at mga mungkahi mo, mga suggestions mo sa publiko at gobyerno sa pamamagitan pa ng mga drawing, no? You haven't given up. So, ano naman ngayon ang reaction mo sa pagbaha na dulot ng Typhoon Ulysses?
Well, ang kagaya ng sinabi ko sa isang nag-interview sa akin, same flood, different year. So paulit-ulit na lang yung problema natin at hindi natin talagang tinututukan yung long-term solution. So yung pinaka-source ng ating mga problema, which is very quickly, very simply, yung uplands natin, kung saan nanggagaling yung tubig baha. So yung source, siyempre nag-iba rin yung sitwasyon, dumadami yung source of water dahil nasa CCA or climate change. And we need to adapt to the climate change dahil lalakas at lalakas yung mga typhoon. Although mas konti na every year, ang sinasabi ng mga scientists lalakas to at ibig sabihin yan, dadami yung tubig baha.
Gusto ko lang magtanong tungkol sa yung mga drawings mo, no? Kasi that's one main way you've been trying to communicate your concerns, no? Alala ko nang nangyari yung Ondoy, the major flooding sa Metro Manila naman, no? Yung isang umikot na illustration mo, yung flood-proof barangay hall, no, na may helipad pa.
Yeah, 4-story barangay hall. At yung tuktok niya helipad dahil nga final rescue by helicopter. Pero ang problema, walang infrastructure to rescue. Kaya yung ginawa namin sa ASSURE, yung isang grupo namin na nung pumunta kami ng Tacloban, sinuggest namin na para maiwasan yung mag-incorporate sila ng ordinansya sa building code nila na gumawa ng flood escape stairs. So ang Pinan, imbis na fire escape na bababa ka sa building, flood escape, aakyat ka sa tuktok at doon ka mag-aantay hanggat mawala yung flood waters. So it's an intervention that can save lives, especially in the case of Tacloban for storm surges or for tsunamis in coastal villages.
Yeah, back then, Paulo, no, parang it seemed like a fanciful idea, pero at the same time parang sensible at even realistic, no? Kasi nga tumataas ngayon tubig and ayaw naman natin yung mga barangay hall na maging useless, no? Pero more recently, I noticed another illustration sa iyong Facebook page, itong mega dike, no? From a barangay hall, you've gone much grander, no? Mega Manila, dateline December 2035. After failure to reforest the Sierra Madre, stop illegal logging and quarrying, or contain real estate development up the hills, the government had no recourse but to build mega embankments on both sides of the Marikina River all the way to Laguna de Bay and the Pasig River. And then you go on to describe yung mapupuno itong mega dike na to ng mga tao, ng mga informal settlers, etc. It was not a happy vision for the future ng Metro Manila. I don't think you were just trying to be funny or sarcastic. It seemed like a serious warning. Ano ba, nawawalan ka na ba ng pag-asa? Sabi mo nga, paulit-ulit itong mga baha, no? May pag-asa ba makahanap ng seryosong solusyon ang gobyerno?
Siyempre may pag-asa, but we have to get our acts together and put in more coordination amongst agencies and institutions. So we have to strengthen yung institutional weaknesses that we have. And very importantly, kailangan ma-appreciate natin na yung problema ng baha, iba pang problema, hindi natin masosolve within the boundaries of political frameworks because the geographical realities, kagaya ng baha, nanggagaling sa watershed, hindi sa political boundaries of individual towns or cities or even provinces. An example would be Marikina watershed, which feeds into the Marikina River, at doon nanggaling yung problema natin sa Marikina Valley. The Marikina watershed is over 620 square kilometers in area. Mas malaki pa sa Metro Manila. At dahil nga deforested siya, dyan nanggaling yung tubig baha. And it crosses several political boundaries like 5 towns and cities and three provinces. But we don't have the institutional framework or enough collaboration and cooperation to address it. We have several studies done by World Bank, ADB, DPWH, etc. But none of the structural or non-structural interventions that have been suggested have been followed. Yung drawings are just a release for frustration that if we don't address our problems, yan nga, lalala yung problema. Simple lang ipika sa tao, bundok at valley, nanggagaling yung tubig baha sa sides ng mountains at bababa siya. That's why you call it a valley. The complication sa Cagayan is that it is also a floodplain because it's malapad siya, no? So nagiging floodplain yung river systems. So all of these are silting up dahil nga nagdi-deforest nga yung uplands, bababa din yung silt ng galing sa bundok, liliit yung capacity ng mga rivers. And then on the side ng towns and cities in Cagayan, Isabela, and all the provinces, ang isa pang gumagalaw na data is the fact that we are increasing in population. So the population increase means an increase in human settlements, means an decrease in area na dati nag-absorb ng tubig, at lalo nang marireduce yung capacity to absorb, lalo nang bumabaha. So it's a ramping up of all of the sources of or causes of floods, both from the uplands, the middle, and then the lowlands. So it's a vicious and connected cycle that it's easy to understand if you just explain it that way, that the water comes down, it will flood because we are also reducing the capacity to absorb that flood. Very simple.
Balikan natin yung Ondo, no? Kasi
noon pa, nananawagan ka na medyo complicated itong problema. Meron ka bang napansin na aspeto ng napakalaking issue ng pagbaha na nasusolusyonan? Have you seen any progress since then, no? Between those two great floods, no? The 2000, of course, there are other floods in between, pero ang naalala natin yung Ondoy ng 2009, and then ngayon, a big part of Luzon has been underwater, no?
Well,
has everything just gotten worse, or may nakita ka bang progress kahit koonte?
Things have gotten worse, but yung pagka-worsen ng sitwasyon is beyond our control. Well, it's our fault also. It's climate change. So we're playing catch up. There have been a number of interventions and programs to the credit of even the government, the DNR, and even civic groups. Reforestation has been something a lot of programs have been started in the last 10 years. Of course, the problem is very big. I mean, we've lost 80-90% of our forest cover sa lahat ng ating bundok. And it will take another generation or two before we can even make a dent in reforestation. But we have to do it. The good thing, it has started. So now the reality we have to face is that from the structural solution point of view, there are two ways of addressing flooding, which is structural, which is the dams and the building of a large infrastructure. Even planting of trees is considered a structural solution. And then you have the non-structural, which is the early warning, which is the information, dissemination, education, and communication, which doesn't cost so much. We can also address that. We have malaking pagkukulang natin sa education, communication, and cooperation in between agencies and to the general public.
Sa tingin mo, dapat ipinagpatuloy yung Project NOAA?
Of course, kailangan natin yung Project NOAA for monitoring pre, during, and post-event because nagbabago yung sitwasyon in every site every year. You are not stopping urban settlements from growing, so that affects everything in the site. If you build a subdivision beside a creek and they do a little adjustment of borders, ma-affect yung flow ng creeks and rivers, and you're adding more volume. So things change every year. What we need is constant monitoring, which is what NOAA was all about anyway. And this data is important. The money that we are going to spend to sustain NOAA is very small compared to what we need to do to produce the solutions. And we cannot produce cost-effective solutions unless you have the data. So it's very important.
Sinabi mo nga sa isang interview, floods don't stop at political boundaries. Yun ang ibig mong sabihin, ano? Yung nagdedesisyon sa baba, yung mga politiko, mga elected officials whose jurisdiction is defined by artificial boundaries, pero the boundaries of nature, yung mga watershed, yung mga valleys, etc.
Yes.
ay yun nga, hindi nga sumusunod sa artificial boundaries yan. Kaya siya natural.
Yes, ang approach ng physical planning dati or city planning, urban planning, regional planning used to be very tied sa political, but we have changed this with the Institute of Environmental Planning and Planning per se. Ang standard approach namin ngayon is ang tinatawag nating ridge to reef, mula sa bundok hanggang sa coastal areas. Dahil yan yung reality ng climate change at yan yung source of most of our challenges in environmental planning and urban development. So we have to really look at where things start and where things end, and all of the interventions must be within that framework. By law, again, we have very good laws regarding planning, although we do still have to pass the Land Use Act. Yan ang kulang sa physical planning. Provinces have to create every few years a physical framework plan, which is the basis of the framework plans, of physical framework plans of the towns and cities within the provincial boundaries. If we don't do that, we cannot legislate floods from happening. It cannot be done.
Sa ilalim ng concept ng land use, Maaari bang sabihin na yung mga flood-prone areas katulad yan ay hindi na dapat tinitirhan?
Tama yan. Kaya may mga easement requirements tayo sa lahat ng rivers, creeks, and waterways. Except that hindi nasusundan to lahat. And the easements were set decades ago na wala pa yung climate change situation. Our easements should increase. In fact, the master plan for Quezon City done in 1939 showed easements in all of the creeks and rivers na 50 to 100 meters in width. Except ngayon, walang makikitang easement sa mga estero natin. Hindi nasundan yung abiso ng mga planners.
Yun ang mga tabing ilog na hindi dapat tinitirhan, kumbaga.
Hindi dapat talaga. Dahil nga, it's the first to overflow, especially in urban areas. Of course, it's a complicated situation in very dense cities or metropolises like Metro Manila, na talagang wala ng easement sa ibang mga segment ng Pasig at San Juan and Marikina. Although Marikina has cleared most of its easement, no? The problem is the areas around it contribute to the overflow. So it's either you make the easements very wide or you maintain the river so its capacity, it's not silted, maganda pa yung capacity to absorb additional waters. So you can fight it from two ends, either from the easements on the side or the depth and capacity of the waterway. Those are the engineering considerations. But again, yan ang problema. Every river, every estero is different. And the situation is not a one-size-fits-all solution. But you have to understand that ultimately, ang hinahanap natin yung capacity ng waterway to carry peak flood loads. Yung peak ang importante dahil nga nawala na yung forest cover at mas mabilis bumaba yung baha, you have to design for bigger and bigger peak loads. If you do a graph, makikita mo na when it rains, hindi agad-agad umakyat yung volume ng tubig. Kaya nung minamatsdan natin yung Marikina River, it takes a while bago umangat yung level niya. And that is because it's waiting for the water to come down. And then, even nawala na yung typhoon, aakyat yung peak until a couple of hours after the event, aakyat pa yan kasi bumababa pa yung tubig galing sa bundok o galing sa tabi, and that will increase the peak loads.
Pero magandang halimbawa sa Pilipinas kang nakikita.
Medyo biased ako, pero yung mga proyektong ginagawa namin sa Iloilo, siyempre yung mga syudad o lungsod na kagaya ng Iloilo, mas maliit to kaysa sa Metro Manila at hindi yung population at extent ng development hindi masyadong scattered, no? So Iloilo has cleaned its river. Meron siyang flood control system na in-implement. We were involved sa Esplanade. So cleaner yung easements ng waterways nila, naghanap sila ng relocation site para sa mga informal, nagtanim uli ng mangrove. So yung both natural and hard engineering interventions nilagay nila, at ang importante nito, si Senator Frank Trilon made sure na palaging may dredger sa Iloilo River. So constantly dinedredge ang Iloilo River to keep its capacity the same. So the lessons that are learned is you make sure your waterways are clean and clear of informals, relocate them, put in the infrastructure, and then you maintain the infrastructure. We also just completed yung sa Boracay, wetland number 4. And this is to bring back the function of the wetland to, alam nyo, bumabaha sa Boracay, di ba? So one of the areas right beside the mall, bumabaha yan. But that's an old wetland. Binalik namin yung wetland, nagtanim uli kami ng mangrove. At to add to that, dahil medyo urbanized na yung portion na yan ng Boracay, nag-construct kami na tinatawag na rain garden. So beside the road yung planting verge, ang design namin medyo konting depression tapos may gravel at halaman. This is more absorptive of rainwater. So bago pumunta sa drainage canal, sasaluhin nitong rain garden yung excess storm water. So it's a new intervention that landscape architects are doing for cities around the world called stormwater management through the introduction ng pervious paving, which is yung mga butas-butas nga na and then through introduction of planting that can absorb excess water. So the basic thing that cities can do is to plant more trees, because the root systems of the trees are the ones that absorb a lot of the excess water. Of course, you have to get the water to the trees. If you go to Singapore, mapapansin nyo sa lahat ng major roads, may malapad na planting verge. In between the road and the drainage on one side, nandyan yung mga punong kahoy. Tapos yung drainage na papunta sa drainage canal, may mga butas-butas yan. Umuulan palagi sa Singapore, no? Ang nangyayari sa stormwater nila, pupunta muna to sa planting verge at i-absorb ng root systems kaya malalaki yung mga puno sa Singapore. So it helps. All of these interventions creates more greenery, which lowers the urban heat island effect of cities, will absorb the stormwater, and will reduce and increase the capacities of the drainage system to absorb any stormwater. This can be done.
Ang ganda pakinggan, ano? Siyempre, everybody would want a greener environment, a safer environment, no? So, parang common sense lang yung sinasabi mo. So, bakit parang napakahirap mag-adopt niyan? I mean, you were only able to cite 2 examples, no? There are many more examples of bad water management systems.
Weigh in on the suggestion to create new departments. My suggestion is to create a department of common sense. It's very simple. Pero yung technical expertise to do this is there. Any LGU can approach the Philippine Association of Landscape Architects and the Institute of Environmental Planners. All of the details, lahat ng kailangan sundan para ma-implement itong mga initiatives na to, nagawa na, nandyan na.
Babalikan ko lang yung original point ko about the Cagayan Valley, no? So ang sinasabi mo ay may dalawang napakalaking intervention yung kailangan mangyari dito. Yung kailangan alagaan yung watershed at kailangan alagaan yung ilog.
Yes, it's tama yan. Yung pinanggagalingan ng problema yung pagwala ng punong kahoy sa bundok. Kailangan ibalik, i-reforest ang uplands at i-maintain yung natural and man-made water systems for the rivers and below. But in between, because it will take a long time for us to reforest, we still have to rely on hard interventions like detention basins and maybe some dams. There are a lot of controversy, of course, in the dams and the release of water, but that is because we do not have enough and the problem has increased. So we will have to look at hard solutions of detention basins and some dams to be able to check what will happen again. Kailangan pag-aralan to as a whole system, up and down the Cordilleras and the Sierra Madres on both sides, across political boundaries, across regional boundaries. So unless this problem is addressed system-wide, if you solve only in one region, the only thing that will happen is yung tubig baha pupunta sa next region. You're just pushing the problem away. We have to address the problem from the very top, the ridge, all the way to the reef, which is the coastal. Again, let me emphasize, one has to look at the realities of watersheds and the whole natural region rather than the political boundaries.
Okay, maraming salamat sa iyo, Paulo Alcazaren, for your common sense ideas. Si Paulo Alcazaren, isang urban planner at landscape architect.
Salamat din, Howie.
Ang arko ni Noah sa Biblia ay bigay ng Diyos para masagip ang tao at hayop noong binaha ang buong mundo. Ang arko natin sa modernong panahon ay ang isip ng tao na nakakalikha ng mga solusyon at ang kakayahang ipatupad ang mga ito. Nandyan na ang mga solusyon, kasama ng pangangailangang ibalik ang mga puno sa kabundukan. Ang kulang na lang ang mga desisyon sa paglapat ng solusyon at ang pagkakaisa ng lahat para masunod ang mga ito. sa ikasasagip nating lahat. Maraming salamat sa panonood at pakikinig. Ako po si Howie Severino.